Hello everybody. Welcome. I'm finishing my walk in the gardens for today. And there's trouble in my little family here, which I may have contributed to out of naivete. I like to feed the birds. It's a way of getting to know them. However, I wasn't paying attention to the fact that there are territories, and now my boy bird, he's having to fight to keep the boundaries on his territory from other birds who have become aware that I feed birds. And so I'm having to learn a painful lesson. I certainly don't want to upset the pair who I'm really close to. I don't want to bring trouble to their home. And it's probably not merely me. Other people may have similar habits. But this is one of those situations where my naive desire to form relationships with living beings can be naive, right? So I'm having to face some of the repercussions of that today, and I don't know if there's a good way to resolve it. Could be problematical, though I have some ideas and I'll work with it. So I was thinking today about, as I often am, our minds and how we think when we're awake in our sort of ordinary, everyday mind states, which are unique for each of us, right? These generalizations capture nearly nothing of what actually goes on in our mental worlds. But a friend of mine last night said something really interesting. My friend Ryan, first diver. I strongly recommend that you check out some of his videos, particularly his videos on phenology. He's been a brilliant friend and an amazing mind, an inspiration, and a brilliant teacher to me. I have great respect and admiration for him. And he posted something on Facebook last night where he said, I feel like my friends who wear shoes that don't allow their feet to feel the ground, like imagine what would happen if you did something like that with your hand. And I was immediately, I responded, yes, I have the same concern about people's minds, right? Of course, I generally wear shoes that allow me to feel my feet and to feel the ground. And given a choice, I'd probably wear moccasins, but, well, I guess I do have a choice. But I tend to wear vapor gloves, and so I feel what's under my feet, and that's a problem because, my feet are not adjusted to being barefoot. His are more well adjusted, and that presents all kinds of risks too, particularly in urban settings. But it presents injury risks, and it's not that different. The vapor gloves are somewhat protective, but if I step on something pointy, I feel it, right? And sometimes I'll put my foot down and have to suddenly adjust my balance because there's something sharp under my foot. But I want to feel the ground with my feet. And I also think it's interesting, metaphorically speaking, that trees have roots that are underground. And so we must imagine those roots are pretty much always in darkness. And isn't it peculiar that the humans, most of us, there are many exceptions, however, we keep our feet in darkness all the time. Yeah, many of us. And that's kind of an interesting correlation there. I don't want to make too much of it, On the other hand, neither do I wish to dismiss it. There's something going on there, right? Our relationship with trees is vastly older and stranger than we imagine. Our languages, sciences, alphabets, mathematics, all of these things, our libraries, our computational systems, all of these things come down to tree metaphors. They're founded in tree metaphors, and this is why the idea of holophors, root aspects of meaning without which other things are meaningless, is important to me. That's a discovery that I'm pretty sure I made on my own. Well, I had some help, but it wasn't from humans. So I'm concerned about the roots of things, right? If you have a problem, you want to get at the root of the problem rather than trying to solve the symptoms. So I was thinking about what he was saying and my concern about our minds. And this afternoon, this is an insight that occasionally surfaces in my consciousness. I became aware of the incredible profundity, again, of peripheral vision. So we have foveal vision, which is our central vision, and that's the stuff we see detail and color with. It's really important. But we also have our peripheral vision, which we're not often consciously aware of it the way we are of our foveal vision. But if looking at the night sky, you move your eyes around, you move your gaze, you'll notice that there are some stars that you can only see peripherally. When you look directly at them, they disappear. And this is a really important idea in consciousness and thought. It's a really profound analogy of something that's going on all the time. And what's going on all the time is that our foveal thinking is overwhelming our peripheral thinking. But our peripheral thinking is older, more nuanced, subtle, easily overwhelmed by the incredible seeming charisma or, the compelling nature of the thoughts on the surface of our minds, our concerns, our worries, our fears, our hopes, so on. And, we have the same problem in culture. It's a problem similar to light pollution. There's so much noise, there's so much mechanism, there's so much disembodied activity around production and consuming things, that the subtler aspects of our hearts and our spirits and our minds are easily overwhelmed and eventually disappear. When we are children, this has not yet become so much of a problem for most of us, though some children are born with particular vulnerabilities and or gifts in that they are sort of pre-adapted to strong representational cognition, what I'll call that. So today, as I was shortly after my meditation, I became aware that, again, of this problem of the peripheral aspects of our awareness and our emotions, their subtlety, their nuance, and how easily they're overwhelmed by almost anything. Right? It doesn't take much. If you just glance toward the peripheral star, it disappears. You have to look away and then find your way back, letting the peripheral vision lead you. And so many of the most important aspects and features of our intelligence, our creativity, our emotions, our spirit, they are like this, right? They're easily overwhelmed, they're easily hidden by the seeming brightness of almost any kind of ordinary cognitive activity. I was speaking last night with my son, and he was telling me of some trouble in his world. And it was very significant. And I realized as I was listening to him speak and feeling along with him about what he was sharing with me, I realized something rather peculiar, which was, if I start speaking right now, I will lose the way of following him in my heart. I will lose my feelings, and I will become involved with language and speaking, just as I am now. And so in a way, it's as if we are with our minds while awake. Of course, something else is happening while we're sleeping too. But while we are awake, it is as if we are funding certain imperatives of consciousness, potentials, right? And just like a nation can fund various agendas, it's similar with the energies that we devote to thought, attention, awareness. A brilliant author whose book I've been reading on and off for some time, whose name escapes me at the moment, as does the name of the book. It's a very popular book, and it relates to plant intelligences and possibly to psychedelics. He uses a phrase that he calls sensory gating. And what he means is something similar to what I'm talking about. Ordinarily, the aperture of our awareness is extremely narrow. It's very much like our foveal vision. And so when that gets overfunded, so to speak, there's no energy left for the other things, like sensing, or intimacy, or the felt sense of co-being with other life forms and the living world and the universe and the sky. So we can easily find ourselves in a kind of prison where it's very highly structured, we're very familiar with the structure, we sort of know how all of this works, but we are deceived by this into believing in the broad scope utility of these things, right? Of our thoughts and ideas and models and theories. When in fact, if our peripheral vision were to suddenly become unavailable to us, we would stumble and crash into things all the time. Even when our foveal vision is most of what's going on, our peripheral vision continues to sort of protect us by introducing hints about possible threats or opportunities or situations that our foveal vision is quite poor at recognizing or bringing to our attention. Often when my eyes are half-lidded in meditation, I will see something very subtle. It may be the shadow of an insect or a flight path of an insect. It might be the shadow of a bird. And it stands out quite profoundly in my awareness because I'm not using my foveal vision when my eyes are half-lidded. Now, this is a really amazing topic, and it goes very, very deep if we want to follow it deeply. For today, however, I just want to introduce this distinction and to highlight the fact that many of our most sensitive and delicate faculties are very easily overwhelmed by conscious thought, language, speaking, assertions and objections, the kind of courtroom of consciousness that we may often find ourselves in. And many of our finest faculties are too delicate to survive that harsh light, right? That that bright white LED-like agony. I hate those kinds of lights. That much of our waking consciousness is dominated by. In order to get a sense of this, rather than just an intellectual sense, which is not very useful, by the way, although the idea is interesting and such, it won't help us much unless we can embody it, which means we have to turn down the light of formal representational cognition, language, what Zen people will refer to as the mind that discriminates, the mind that distinguishes. And while that mind is very powerful and useful, it's very powerful and useful only in a very narrow array of contexts. Whereas the old stuff, the good stuff, the beautiful, subtle stuff is absolutely essential to our health and well-being, our nature as human beings, our intelligence, our creativity, and our capacity to notice and respond to situations that our foveal thinking almost intentionally overlooks. And when it doesn't overlook it, it tries to overstand it. It's really almost like we have two different animals here within us. And one of them, while we are awake, is being dominated, and forgive me for being blunt here, for most of us it's kind of being prison fucked by our formal faculties. So I just want to introduce the trope, the analogy here to our peripheral vision and how important it is. And I hope that you will experiment with your peripheral vision and transforming, changing back and forth between your peripheral and foveal vision. There is another aspect of seeing that not many of us are familiar with that's often referred to as gazing. And gazing is in a way an experience of relaxing the foveal vision so that it takes in the broad field somewhat as a gestalt, right? The whole broad field of vision. And you can practice this, you can learn about it easily. It's a technique that many people who pay close attention to nature have developed because they want to include their peripheral vision more impactfully in their visual experience. Now, I've always had sensitive peripheral vision, so it gives me information that other people don't get. I see very tiny things, I see very small movements. I can often tell what a bird or insect is by just the briefest glance at it or its flight pattern. There are endless libraries of anciently inherited intelligence in our bodies and minds, but they're easily overwhelmed by our modern situation and circumstance. In order to recover them, we have to become aware of this problem and experiment. And it can be difficult to experiment with our minds, but it can be comparatively difficult to experiment with our minds, but it's relatively easy to experiment with our vision. So this is a way that we can feel the analogy that I'm talking about here and experience it directly. This is going to be a short video or short recording for today. Just wanted to sort of make a bookmark here, perhaps for future elaboration. I face the same problem right now. I'm standing next to a busy street and I can only half hear my own voice. Most of what I hear is machine noise. That's the kind of problem that we have in our minds and our awareness. except that it's not so obvious there because the noise tends to dominate the field, and we've long become used to that noise as being just how things are all the time. It's not. Something's being amputated. The subtleties and nuances of our intelligence, our curiosity, which is fundamental to motivation and inspiration, all of these things suffer an ongoing sort of cascade of degradations as we undergo throughout our lives the processes of enlanguaging and enculturation in our modern societies. And we see this problem shot all through what we think of as our societies. Mostly I think of them as diseases masquerading as societies. But it's everywhere you look, right? It's like overwhelm them with noise, dazzle them, give them the spectacle instead of the content, give them the wrapper instead of the food. And this makes for good consumers and slaves, which none of us, I think, really want to be. So bear in mind that most of the faculties that would really enrich our lives and hearts and relationships and minds are not available to us when we're in the trance of, thinking in concepts and names and language and theories and models. Again, those are useful, but the scope of their use is quite narrow when compared to the nearly universal scope of the faculties they too easily overwhelm and hide from our experience and enaction and embodiment. Thank you for joining me today. I look forward to learning together again very soon.